All right. Hello and welcome to Voices of Enablement by GT Buddy, an interview series focusing on the key issues affecting the enablement community today. It's a tough market right now. Organizations are cutting staff, pausing investments. How do you make a compelling case for the value of enablement is the core question that we are seeking to answer. So our guest today is Christian Palmer. I recently got connected to him. He was one of the guest speakers at Enablement Involved. He is currently leading revenue enablement at Riskified. Welcome, Christian. Pleasure having you on the show. I'd love for you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So my name's Christian, as you now know. I work on a global enablement team within Riskified. And what Riskified does, very briefly, is we help enable e-commerce companies to have frictionless transactions. And what I mean by that is at the point of checkout, maybe at the point of claims, whatever it may be, to make sure that we can make sure the good customers keep coming back to the website to buy and keeping away any fraudsters or abusers from taking advantage of things on the company's website. We have a global team, as I'd said. My main role is to help out with onboarding as well as coaching, but I do have my hands in the other cross-functional projects, such as like bringing on a new tool or writing up content, things of that nature. Yeah.
Awesome. I know Christian brings a lot of good perspective on in-person training and the virtual training, so we'll love to dig more on that. But yeah, I'm excited to have this conversation, Christian. Let's get into this. The very first question that I have is, we all know, right? These are all tough times for the enablement. A lot of layoffs are happening. Enablement is seen as a cost center versus the force multiplier. So the very first question that I have is, how do you think we can elevate the role of sales enablement with the C-suite in this market?
There's so many things that could be done here to help get that buy-in, especially from senior stakeholders such as the C-suite. It could be difficult. You know, this day and age, I'm not sure that everybody, especially leaders, are well aligned with what kind of support function enablement truly is and can be. You know, each kind of group that I've interacted with kind of have different interpretations of that. So a few things that like kind of you can do, you know, especially in the world where, you know, I'm sure you've seen it, plenty of enablers are getting laid off. Prior to more of my enablement career, I did a lot of learning and development, of which I've been laid off from a few positions for that. So I definitely feel and sympathize with those folks. But I think initially what you want to do is, because a lot of companies are not adding capacity, right? They're not focusing on that. Think about more conversion. How can you help the conversions for the reps that are currently in the seats? Quality over quantity, all of those same kind of mantras there. I think throwing headcount at a problem generally just results in more bottlenecks and then ultimately more layoffs. And I've seen that firsthand in some of my sales experience. How you can kind of do that is involve yourself in higher level meetings. Of course, this is a little bit easier to insert yourself if you're in a, you know, smaller, more scrappy organization, but, you know, to the same effect, you could leverage any of your leaders within the enablement if it's a larger company and a larger enablement function to do this. Sales readiness should probably be like a weekly rigor, if you will. Like every time there's a sales management meeting or there's a team meeting and they're going over like forecasting or pipeline, you know, talk about how rep productivity is doing, and how we can get reps to be more productive with the sales cycle that they have, with the tools that they have, with any internal, external materials and what have you. A lot of the times now, I think where enablement comes in is like, we'll help reps who are usually at a deficit, you know, at the deal level. So like help them, you know, move deals along. And not to say that that work is not important, but I think like if you kind of think beyond that and how to tie your sales reps readiness to actual company outcomes and ideally North Star metrics for the company, like, you know, whatever, some type of revenue goal that's at the forefront of that year, then you have a lot more to kind of stand on. You have some legs beneath you. I think probably the only other point to make here is like, how can you go beyond training, coaching, and onboarding? Like, what is those C-suites understanding of enablement, their experience with it or lack thereof, and then how you can showcase your value across an entire organization. You know, I've had plenty of interviews in the past, and it's not to discredit anybody who's in the C-suite, but a lot of the times they'll say, well, we need somebody to come in to create an onboarding program, or you'll see that in job descriptions. I actually talked to Kieran a lot about that on Enablement Evolved. Like, how do you kind of show them that you can do a lot more than just training and onboarding, all the other facets of enablement? So I think in general, I mean, there's an element of building rapport there with C-suite, but also kind of showing them that the actionable insights that you can tie back to revenue goals will demonstrate value.
Yeah, I think you mentioned a great point. I think the majority of enablement by the C-suite is also very important. So on this particular podcast itself, I've spoken to a lot of enablement leaders who report to the CEO, CRO, and they all they care about is the outcomes. That okay, how are these sales readiness initiatives leading to better revenue outcomes? And then there are other ones, right, who are very much on the checklist in enablement, like are you running this particular initiative? They don't talk much about the outcome or what is the impact of this particular training or any initiative. So I think it also depends on the understanding of that one. But yeah,
Yep.
how from an enablement standpoint can you take elevate your role is by aligning them on the metrics that probably the board cares about or the revenue metrics, and then tie all your initiatives according to that.
Right.
Yeah. Cool. So what are the kind of metrics, Christian, do you generally take care of? Can do you consider when you are trying to elevate your role or roll out any particular initiative, or when you have a conversation with the C-suite? Can you throw some light on such those metrics?
Yeah, I mean, there's the easy ones that are always going to be top of mind that I would say most C-suite should at least have an idea of or understand. Time to first deal, how long is it before a rep meets their quota? What is their ramp up time? If you can reduce, 1, 2, or 3 of those things, that shows that there is a faster vehicle for reps getting up to speed and conducting their role effectively. I think that is always of value. But I think also maybe, and this is a little bit harder to measure, but like show off the soft skills that will tie into, revenue and activity metrics and everything thereafter. Things like, are they communicating effectively? Are they actively listening? Are they, doing a proper discovery? Some of the call recording tools actually do a good job of this, like, showing off insights around how long was your longest speech, or they call it a monologue, let's say, like how long was your longest monologue and what was your percentage of speaking versus the prospect. Things like that can help kind of guardrail around revenue goals and show like, yeah, they, went through this certification on, I don't know, like a CMS or something like that. And they were able to demonstrate, these skills. And we now know that, their skill sets prior were not as strong, and we can show that difference and that delta.
Yeah. I think time to first deal is one metric that where you can show a quick win to get again a buy-in from the from the C-suite, and to show the impact as early as possible. The other thing, Christian, that you mentioned is onboarding is one, right? But we all know onboarding is just one important part of enablement. There's a lot of handholding, or there's a lot of help enablement people can provide to the sales team. And again, I think in a time like this, where selling is very tough, like you said, it's not about increasing headcounts, it's all about increasing the performance per headcount. So how do you think can enablement, partner with the companies to elevate their sales? Besides the onboarding programs, what are the other initiatives that you think they can take?
I think definitely, and again, this probably pertains to organizations that don't have as much infrastructure, but first and foremost, get all of your information into one place. I can't tell you how often I see it where I don't know how else to say it. We're in like Google Drive hell. Like there's so many, docs that are all over the place. And even if we use folders for them within Google and whatnot, it's still relatively unorganized and not easily digestible or easily searchable for that matter by a rep. So, a lot of this can be solved with a CMS, like a HighSpot or a MindSickle, something along those lines. But I think like in addition, other things that can be done through that is like digital sales rooms. That's a big topic of late. Like you can centralize your interactions with prospects. You can deliver certain content, control that flow of information, chat with them in real time, mutual action plans. It's really pertains the most. And a lot of, the deals that reps work on at my company currently, a lot of them are deals where we have to multi-thread, which means we have to go after other leaders or stakeholders within the business. And a decision to buy us it doesn't come down to one person nowadays. It comes down to multiple people that sit in a Google Meet, yay or nay it, and then based off that, they can make a decision. So, if we're able to kind of centralize that communication and not have emails get lost, I think like those things are not, maybe aspects that leadership in companies are really thinking a ton about. But it makes a massive difference if reps can find what they need in a timely manner. And, there's differentiated types of learnings on there. So not just, recorded sessions and a deck, but like micro learning, short form content, just in time, all that stuff. I think if you also think about how it's going to be critical in the org is like you're a liaison a lot of the time. And further to that, an advocate for sales reps and leaders. So any of the roles that I've been in where, you're working with other cross-functional teams, enablement's a role where you're going to do a lot of that. You become an agent of change. We're not just training experts, we're more like business transformation experts, in essence, and training is a part of that. So like, how do you understand, and empathize, but also kind of see and walk in the shoes of those that are on the product team or on a marketing team, and data analytics, those are probably the three most common ones. And how can you translate that to what sales leaders and reps are really going to care about? It's incredibly challenging. That, make no mistake, I think just offering to be that person can a lot of the time help bridge the gap. And also it reduces the silos. You put yourself on these weekly syncs, you over communicate in a strategic way. Reps and leaders should feel incredibly connected based off what you can bring to the table and your knowledge base of being in these other cross-functional teams. So, I think in the economic environment, I think if you think about the way the resource is understood to be traditionally, which is just a training and onboarding arm, versus what it actually could be, which is what I said, that agent to change or a business transformation expert, that's incredibly valuable.
Yeah. And I think, again, selling is a team sport, right? There's a lot of information that your customer success teams has, or your product team has, and maybe sellers are not proactively doing this collaboration, but that is where enablement team can come in, and they can collect all this information, knowledge from different functions, and try to collate it at different pace, and then try to deliver it in a micro learning format to the salespeople, so they have whatever they need to communicate with the customer or close a deal. So I think that over communication part that you spoke about, or liaising with different teams, is again very crucial. The other thing, Christian, I want to speak about, because you speak a lot about enablement, the onboarding, there is a forgetting curve. And every enablement person that I speak with, they say, okay, we've done this training program, and the rep forget probably 60-70% of the information in the next 1 hour. How do you reinforce this training knowledge so that the knowledge retention is there? And if the knowledge retention is not there, the whatever initiative that you have taken, you will not be able to show the outcome. It will not be optimized properly. So what is your take on that? How do you think you can drive knowledge retention or reinforce the training knowledge in the moments of the need?
At the end of the day, a deck, a session where it's an ILT instructor-led training, it's only going to go so far. You took a test back in school, you studied really hard for the test, you knew all the information when it came to test time, but the moment you walked out that door, you forgot the majority of it. And I think one thing that I always try to drive behind any type of material I'm promoting, whether that's like an actual one-page or PDF collateral, or it's an actual session, is show reps how they can learn about things on their own without the need from me. When I was really young and I was like figuring out what I wanted to do in college and everything, and my dad did very well in school, and he told me that it doesn't really matter what your major is, what you're studying, or everything like that when you're in your undergrad degree, because all you're doing is learning how to learn. And that really stuck with me, because it didn't really matter what topic came up in school. I went to a private college, so I had a lot of like theology and philosophy classes and stuff, and none of it really mattered to me. But I found myself using that, like learning in a way that I've been able to teach myself over time, I think is really important. And with that, and how you can actually action that, is by having differentiated pieces of content. I mentioned it before, but obviously like integrate the training through multiple methods, short form, just in time. In the world of TikTok and everything that we have now, like you need to be able to have learnings that are under 5 minutes, I would say. Reps spend less time knowledge gathering and more time executing. So any type of session that I put together, it's one thing to send a follow-up email. It's another thing to have like a one-pager. Those things I still do. But what you want to do in addition to that is segment part of your session into an easily digestible, summarized video. And if somebody wants to get more info, they can look at the actual recording or look at the deck or whatever it may be. I think, in addition to that, like if you have good change management protocols, like constant improvement of the materials that you have, it's always going to be a role that you play. And even right now, like revamping our onboarding content, making sure it's up to date via our products. Maybe there's new offerings, a different way that we sell products that are maybe now defunct that we don't need to talk about anymore. I can't tell you how rewarding it can be as a learner if when you look at that content when you first come into the business, it is up to date, it is good looking, and making sure that you have pretty good ongoing check-ins with the content to make sure that it works. I mean, that kind of sounds silly, but you want to make sure that like your recording isn't deleted, or like if you have, maybe other content on there for maybe client examples or case studies for things that we're not working with them anymore, things like that, can make a big difference. But I think, like, also, if you drum up the culture, and what I mean by that is like banging the drum around measuring culture throughout the business. A lot of that is the ramp time, like the rep driving value in a deal. Like, how can we correlate satisfaction, retention of the material, and their performance with our enablement efforts? Hard to measure, but if you can get it down, that is a good way to kind of, increase the culture around the business of learning. You want to create that learning culture. And then this last piece is something I've mentioned before, but I think it always kind of gets like, I think it kind of gets always overlooked because it's an incredibly soft skill, but it's so far more valuable than people think, and is be the hype man. It's integral for like the early rapport building. You see this a lot. I see a lot of marketing folks come in and do this. Like, when your role in enablement, it's purely based around influence. The stakeholders internally need to buy in, and they need to be able to help you execute your plan, some more than others. But if you're not, kind of being that cheerleader, I guess is the best way to say it, like, you're not really going to be looked to as that culture driver. And culture driver can produce results indirectly.
Yeah. And you mentioned a great point, be the hype. And I think a lot of enablement people that I've spoken to, they say, okay, it feels like enablement is running the show, on their own, but they need a lot of help from the frontline sales managers to drive the adoption, or to, again, reinforcing that why enablement is required. Otherwise, sellers will just take it as a chore to be done. So can you talk to us more on the, how do you convince? I know it's not an easy conversation. From the conversation that I've had with other enablement people, how do you get a buy-in from the frontline sales managers? How do you, convince them, okay, this particular training or is initiative is important? I think this will give a lot of clarity to the other practitioners while they are releasing any other initiative, and they know how to get a buy-in from the frontline sales managers.
This can obviously be easily done if you have more recent sales experience, right? There's a good chance that your sales managers are folks that worked their way up in an organization generally, or they're coming in from a previous organization where they did work themselves up. I think there's an element of flattery there, but also, through that flattery, you can rapport build, and, understanding the challenges that they face as a new manager. Suffice to say, a lot of orgs don't have like good management training, right? Like, they push people into management. They're not necessarily ready, but it's the next logical step, and they kind of learn as they go. So I take it upon myself, especially if it's like a middle level manager, to help upskill them, both from like an EQ, like emotional standpoint with their reps, but also like tactically. How can you use the information or the data that you're reviewing on Salesforce every day to your advantage when you're speaking to reps, showing them the insights, making the connections, recognizing things that maybe have not worked or are currently not working, and then pivot quickly. And over communication is always a thing. I mean, the same types of skills that an enabler is going to have, I think a sales manager should exhibit. But generally speaking, what I tried to do in the beginning is get to know them on a personal level, like find out what they care about outside of sales, outside of the company. A lot of the times it's always comes down to the same things, like the family, maybe their hobbies or interests, where they live, what they're trying to work towards, things like that. And then I make it a mission to kind of implement those in more business related conversations, kind of as like an anecdote or something to add to like have some comedic relief. So an example of that would be like, let's say we're all sitting down for a meeting, and that manager had revealed to me, okay, we just closed on our first home, right? Like, they're able to get a mortgage or what have you for their home. I shout them out at the beginning of the session if they haven't already shared that with their team. Some would say that might backfire on you if your manager didn't want you to share that. But at the end of the day, like, they're going to feel good that they're getting recognized. They're going to know that they've been heard by me. And the same applies for maybe certain tactics or methodologies that they want to implement, echoing them, just like you expect them to echo everything enablement, right? So it's a two-way street, and there's no magic formula for this to work. And make no mistake, I've dealt with some tougher managers that are hard to get aligned with. And I think at the end of the day, if you kind of meet them and mirror them at the level that they're looking for, make sure that you're tying in results that are going to be beneficial to you and to them. And ensuring that while they're echoing your enablement sentiments, you're also echoing their management sentiments.
Yeah. I think it's just like, clearly your approach is more towards the rapport building and seeing, okay, can we find a shared objective?
Right.
What do they care about, and then try to meet them level with them, and then help reinforce the enablement onto their reps. Got it.
Yeah.
Christian, the other question that I have is, again, people are not hiring a lot of reps in today's market, and you already said enablement is not just about onboarding.
Yeah.
So again, like, what kind of enablement support can you provide to some of the tenured reps? Can you talk to us more on some of the initiatives that enablement can provide to tenured reps?
I love this question. It was something that I had a ton of imposter syndrome around when I first started training. Why should a tenured rep listen to me when they have double or triple the amount of time in an individual contributor role than I do?
Yeah.
They've made more money than me. They've had more,
Maybe
billables.
product experience,
Yeah,
right?
that could be too.
Yeah.
And like you don't necessarily, and I think it's easy to get into that rabbit hole of like, you're not enough or anything like that. But what I found over time is leveraging them is of the utmost importance. So I think first and foremost, understand if you're thinking about it from, like a training standpoint, first and foremost, like what are their skills and knowledge gaps, right? Of a tenured rep. Now that they are experienced, they might have some more advanced level issues, or depending on their business line, they might be selling into organizations that are quite a bit larger, have a lot of players in a company or a prospect that they're selling to. And that requires a little bit more tact and tenacity to get through rather than a smaller org that maybe you're selling to. So if we're thinking purely in SaaS, like, is there a need to everboard? And what I mean by that is like, is there continuous training that maybe more tenured reps are going to need? And at what point would that delivery be helpful? 6 months, a year down the line, further to that? What's missing? And then I think the big thing, and this is something I like overlooked a lot in the beginning, is like, how has the sales cycle changed from when they started to now? Far too often is it like, you come in, you see all these tenured reps, they're doing a really great job, they're making the majority of the money, they're the reason why the teams are hitting the quota for the most part, and they're carrying those that are not tenured below them. Like how do you understand, okay, like the way that the youngest reps are or least tenured reps are doing the work now, is that any different than what those tenured reps did initially? Because if it is there a reason to that? Maybe our sales process changed, maybe the vehicle to get what we're selling changed, things like that make a big difference. And if both the tenured reps and the untenured reps are not selling the same way, it's very hard to grow that function. I think kind of building off that, like, utilize them as a resource. So like new reps are going to have struggles, right? They would benefit from having a tenured voice with them. And this goes beyond just like asking a question on a sales meeting. Like, you want to work within their means. They're busy. You don't want to pile on more duties or tell them like, hey, can you run a training? If it ever comes to that, I'm doing the majority of the legwork up front. So they just got to walk in and talk, which is what most of the time they're going to do best anyways. Shout them out for great examples, base enablement around their best practices. That's what a playbook is, right? Like the tenured reps are specimens for playbooks because they've exhibited the best practices to get to the level that they're at, right? So have them talk through anecdotes if they have materials that maybe they found on their own. I think it creates kind of like this harmonious relationship with you as the enabler and the less tenured reps, below those tenured reps, as like, hey, we can all kind of work together here. So everyone is kind of aligned on what's going to work best. Besides like, like finding out more about those reps specifically, like look at the tech stack. Like, what can we consolidate? What are those tenured reps not using a lot? There's a few that I know usually get overbought. Lead enrichment is a big one. I get a message at least once a week about another call AI that's coming out, generative AI that can help me with Gong or something. Usually those things can be bought as an add-on with your current tool that you have. So like if it's a current call recording tool, usually they have an AI arm. If it's a lead enrichment tool, usually your classic sales navigator is going to have something along those lines. So, find out, are those tools being utilized by the tenured reps very much, or are they mostly getting their work done through referrals? That's one thing I've noticed a lot, is that they've built up such a book of business that they don't really need to go to the well and find new information. They kind of rely on those previous connections that they've made, which leads me to believe that, maybe some of these tech tools may not be as much needed. And then like when it comes to content, like establish some rules around the content. And we always talk about like publishing, like how we should publish it, how we to maintain it, how is it shared. And then we look at the usage stats to understand how well it's utilized, like include a tenured rep in that, right? I think if obviously it's a time constraint, you could just comment on a doc or something and get their input that way if time is an issue. And I think you can use that feedback to help reinforce the things that you're talking about, as well as, you know, spice up that content a little bit more to like what reps are really going to care about. A lot of the time enablers are looked at to be as like the voice of enablement, just like this podcast name. And I think a lot of the times that is true, but getting somebody in through the door that you can leverage, you know, for the content itself really, really is helpful.
Yeah. And I think since they are there, they are on the field doing this. And coming from a seller to seller, you know, it really helps you ramp up the younger ones, and they can always talk about, okay, what are the things that are actually working on the field and how they can, you know, quickly grab those things that are working, and then, you know, again, you can prove the time to close a first deal obviously, you know, gets faster. So I think leaning on them to enable the new reps is probably one thing that I think every enablement person lean on. So
Definitely.
yeah, I think Christian, it was I just looked at the time. I think it was such a great, insightful session. Thank you so much for coming on the show, and I'm sure a lot of other practitioners will, you know, get more perspective on this one and might reach out to you. So we look forward to releasing this very soon. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you very much. Take care.